She slipped the note across the counter without looking up. Folded once. No envelope. The kind of fold you learn when paper is something you don't waste. The man who received it, $3,000 suit, name on the deed of half this county, phone already out to call someone who would fix this, stopped mid-sentence. He read the note. He read it again. The whole diner went quiet in that particular way that happens when a room senses something has shifted and no one is sure yet what it is. Miriam Byler set the coffee pot back on the burner, straightened her white cap, and returned to wiping the counter. She did not watch him. She had said what needed to be said. What he did with it was his business now. 4 minutes earlier, Garrett Voss had walked into the Sunrise Diner in Millhaven, Pennsylvania, with 2 lawyers and a folder that was going to end the Byler farm. He had not expected her. Nobody ever did. Millhaven sits in the crease between 2 hills in Lancaster County, the kind of place that shows up on tourist maps as a charming detour and on corporate acquisition maps as an undervalued corridor. Garrett Voss had circled it on his map 18 months ago. He was not a villain in the way villains usually announce themselves. He didn't raise rents overnight or send men with crowbars. He bought quietly. A parcel here, a right-of-way there, a clause in a water agreement that nobody noticed until the water stopped running the direction it used to. He had done it in 3 other counties. He understood how to wait. The Byler farm sat on 42 acres on the northern edge of town, the same 42 acres that Miriam's grandfather had cleared by hand in 1931. The farmhouse was painted white, as it had always been. The fence lines were straight. The garden was already coming up even this early in the year, rows as precise as scripture. And every morning at 5:15, before the roosters had finished their first argument, Miriam Byler drove her buggy 2 miles down the county road to open the Sunrise Diner. She was 29. Her hair was the color of creek water in autumn, tucked entirely under the white cap she'd worn since she was 15. She wore a green dress, plain cut, the hem exactly where it had always been. Her hands, when she set your cup down, were the hands of someone who had made bread and laid fence wire and delivered calves, done all of it without once asking whether it was hard. Nobody in Millhaven thought of Miriam Byler as remarkable. That was in part exactly what she had wanted. She had moved back 4 years ago, after a silence that the community had learned not to ask about directly. She had simply returned one autumn, thinner, quieter than she'd been as a girl, with a way of listening that seemed to go deeper than the room. She joined back into the Ordnung, kept her hours, paid in cash, owned no smartphone or television or computer. She made the best apple butter in 3 counties, and she never overcharged for coffee. That was what Millhaven knew about Miriam Byler. That, and the fact that when she set her jaw a certain way, the conversation was over. She was refilling Earl Hostetter's cup. Earl, 73, who had farmed the adjacent land to the Baylors since before Miriam was born, when she heard it. Not loud. Garrett Voss was not a loud man, but she heard the specific confidence in his voice. The tone of someone who has already decided the outcome and is merely performing the courtesy of narration. She heard him say, Byler parcel, and eminent domain precedent, and rezoning approval already in committee. She set the coffee pot down. She listened to the rest of it with her back to the room. The Sunrise Diner was not large. 8 tables, 4 booths, a counter with 7 stools. At 7:40 in the morning, it held a retired schoolteacher, 2 electricians, Earl, a young woman from the planning office eating alone, and now Garrett Voss and his 2 lawyers, who had stopped here because one of them had been here before and thought the pie was worth it. They had not expected to be overheard. They were, in that sense, not wrong. Nobody who looked at Miriam Byler would have expected her to understand what she was hearing. That was the first mistake. She went back to the kitchen. Gone 4 minutes. When she came back out, she was carrying a fresh basket of rolls and the notepad she used for orders, and a pen. She tore one page from the notepad. She wrote 3 sentences. She walked to the table, set the rolls down without comment, and slid the folded note to Garrett Voss the way you'd slide a check, close enough to reach, not in the way of anything else. Then she went back to the counter. Voss unfolded it. He read it. His lawyer, the taller one, who had been mid-sentence about variance applications, stopped talking. Voss read it a second time. The note said, "Federal Preservation Covenant runs with this land. Call your title company." Page 34. The thing about Miriam Byler was that she had not always been this quiet. There was a version of her, she was 17, 18, who was the opposite of quiet, who had opinions that arrived before she was invited to share them, who had walked into a university classroom in Philadelphia and thought with a clarity she had not expected, "This is where I belong." She had left during Rumspringa, which is not unusual. She had stayed gone, which is also not unusual. Enrolling at Penn was considerably more unusual. She studied land use law and environmental policy and the specific mechanisms by which corporations acquire rural corridors, because she had grown up watching them do exactly that, and she wanted to understand the machinery. She had been good at it. Not good in the way of someone who is pleasantly competent, good in the way that draws attention from people whose attention you have not asked for. In her final years there, she had worked on 3 federal preservation cases, helped classify 16 agricultural properties in 3 states. She had sat across from the kind of men who had more money than God and more lawyers than the Department of Justice, and she had opened her folders and explained, in a tone that contained no particular emotion, exactly why they were going to lose. She had been, in that world, known. Then her mother got sick. Her father had a stroke the same winter. Her brother Jonas, who had stayed, who had never left, who had run the farm alone while Miriam was in Philadelphia doing what she wanted to do, sent her a letter, not an email. A letter, written in the slanted cursive of their schooling, 3 sentences long. She read it once. She put her resignation on her supervisor's desk the next morning. She did not explain. She came home in October. The maples were already done. She drove the rental car as far as the county road, then walked the last half-mile, because she did not know what she would say when she arrived and she needed the time. Her father did not speak after the stroke, but he knew her. She could tell by the way his hand changed in hers. He died in January. Her mother lasted until April. Miriam did not leave again. She did not talk about her years in Philadelphia, not because she was ashamed, she wasn't, but because it belonged to her in a way she could not share without losing something she didn't know how to name. The community did not ask. That was one of the things she had forgotten about coming home. They were better at silence than the world outside was. Jonas knew. He treated it the way he treated most things, practically, without ceremony. "You're back," he'd said, when she walked through the kitchen door that October night. "I'm back," she said. He poured her coffee. They sat until midnight, talking about the fence line on the north pasture, which had a problem. That was all it required. But the law did not leave her. She had imagined that returning to the plain life would mean setting it down, the way you set down a tool when the work is done. Instead, it lived inside her, quiet and available, the way fluency lives in a language you stop speaking, present, waiting, unused. For 4 years she had watched the county change, watched the parcels transfer, read the public records. She went to the county office twice a year and tracked the shape of what Garrett Voss was assembling the way you track weather, not with alarm, but with the specific attention of someone who knows what certain clouds mean. She had understood from the beginning that Voss's interest in the corridor predated her return. Word traveled in Lancaster County, even among people who chose not to carry phones. 2 years before she came home, while she was still working federal cases in Philadelphia, she had heard the name from a colleague who was tracking rural acquisition patterns across 3 states. She had filed a quiet tip with the State Historic Preservation Office before she ever stepped foot in the diner. A procedural measure. Insurance. The previous spring, she had contacted a land rights organization in Harrisburg and opened a case number, in anticipation. 2 months before Voss walked into the Sunrise Diner, she commissioned a title search on the Byler property, hers and Jonas's. She found on page 34 of the original deed a federal preservation covenant attached in 1987. Agricultural heritage classification, essentially untouchable without a years-long federal review. She found the same covenant on 4 neighboring properties. She had not told Jonas because she was waiting to confirm it held under current statute. She confirmed it 3 days ago. As for that particular Tuesday morning, she had learned the night before, through the neighbor's telephone relay that served as the community's practical lifeline, that Voss's team had visited the county planning office and that his lawyers had reserved the private room at the inn on Route 30. She knew the Sunrise Diner was the only breakfast worth stopping for between the inn and the county offices. She had opened at 5:15, as always, and she had waited. The note was not improvised. She had been waiting for the right moment, and she had made sure to be where the moment would find her. The taller lawyer, his name was Rutherford. She would learn this later. Craig Rutherford, Voss and Associates Senior Land Acquisition Counsel, was the one who recovered first. He already had the note. He read it a second time, then a third, in the way educated men read things written by people they have underestimated. Slowly, looking for the error, the misread, the lucky guess that would restore the previous order of things. He found none. He looked at the woman behind the counter in the plain green dress and the white cap, who was now apparently wiping the same section of counter she had already wiped twice. "Excuse me," he said it pleasantly. He was practiced at pleasant. "Ma'am," Miriam looked up. "This note, where did you—" He paused, recalibrated. "Do you know what you've written here?" "Yes," she said. "You're saying there's a federal covenant on the Byler property." "On the Byler property and on 4 adjacent parcels. The covenant was attached in 1987 under the Agricultural Heritage Protection Act, Section 12(c). It runs with the land in perpetuity, requires federal review, and a minimum 18-month public comment period before any change in agricultural use designation." Rutherford had not moved. "Your title search would have caught it," she said. "Page 34 of the original deed package. Easy to miss if you're scanning for standard encumbrances and not looking for federal heritage classifications specifically." Garrett Voss was watching her now. Not with the pleasant dismissal he'd arrived with. Something different, something recalculating. "Who are you?" he said. Miriam set the coffee pot back on the burner. "I'm the waitress," she said. "Would anyone like more coffee?" Rutherford spent 11 minutes on his phone in the parking lot. She watched him without appearing to watch him. She knew the shape of that call, had been on both sides of it. The pace of the walking, the hand going up to the back of the neck. That was the body language of a lawyer, discovering the foundation of a deal is not what he thought it was. When he came back inside, his face had changed. Voss had not moved. He was still at the table with his untouched coffee and the folded note and the expression of a man rerunning the last 20 minutes, trying to locate the point where the room shifted. Rutherford sat down and said something low. She didn't catch it. She didn't need to. She had already started clearing the table in the corner booth. Earl Hostetter leaned over from his stool. "What was that?" he said, in the low Pennsylvania Dutch undertone of a man who has seen enough to know when something has just happened. "Cream pie's coming out in 10 minutes. she said. "You want a piece?" "Miriam. Earl." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Garrett Voss, then back at her. "Your father would have liked that," he said quietly. She didn't answer. But something in her face did, something small and private that she put away again before anyone else could see it. Voss asked to speak to her at 11, after the breakfast rush had cleared. He asked the way executives ask, which is less of a question and more of an assumption that a schedule will rearrange itself. What he didn't know was that Miriam had been woken at 4:30 that morning by a message from Jonas. Not a phone call. Jonas didn't have a phone. A message relayed through their neighbors, the way they did things. A man from the county zoning office had come by the farm the previous afternoon with paperwork, a variance application already in motion. A hearing scheduled for 22 days out. 22 days. She sat across from Voss and his lawyers with her hands flat on the table and a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking. He had a way of making a conversation feel like a negotiation, even when it wasn't meant to be one. He used the word partnership 4 times in the first 6 minutes. He talked about investment in the county, preservation of the rural character. She noted clinically that he was using her own vocabulary, about a land trust arrangement that would protect the Byler farm specifically. She listened to all of it, without expression. "What you found this morning," he said and paused. "That's real. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. But there are ways to work around a federal covenant, given enough time and the right." "There aren't," she said. He looked at her. "Not without an 18-month federal review period, a public comment process, and a finding that the agricultural heritage classification no longer applies. Which it still does on all 5 parcels. The standard for removing that classification requires demonstrating that the land has ceased to be used for agricultural purposes. The Byler farm has not. Neither have the adjacent properties." Silence. "You know federal land use law," Rutherford said. He said it the way someone might say, "You speak Mandarin." Not hostile, just reconfiguring. "I studied it," she said. "A while ago." "Where?" She picked up her coffee, drank it, set it down. "Would you like more coffee?" she said. Rutherford, the taller lawyer, Craig Rutherford, almost smiled. Almost. "Ms. Byler," Voss said. He had stopped using the tone she noticed. "I'd like to know who I'm actually talking to." "You're talking to the woman who serves coffee here, who grew up on that farm, who knows what's in the deed." "And what else?" She looked at him steadily. "That's enough," she said. "That's all you need." He called his title company from the table. She heard it, not the words. He stepped to the far corner of the diner. But the frequency of it, that flat urgency that moves into a man's voice when something he assumed was solid turns out not to be. The younger lawyer was on his laptop. She watched him scroll, stop, scroll back. He looked up and found her looking at him. He looked back at his screen. She went into the kitchen to start the lunch prep. Jonas arrived at 11:40. He had waited until the morning milking was done and the horses were fed. The farm did not pause for crises. It never had. And then driven the buggy into town the long way, which was the way he always came when he needed to think. He came in the back, stomping his boots on the mat, hanging his hat on the peg inside the door. 34, heavier than their father had been, with the kind of quiet that comes from spending most of your life working without an audience. He sat at the counter, and she put coffee in front of him without being asked. "He came to the farm this morning," Jonas said. "I know. Sit." "Miriam, I know, Jonas." Gently. "I know about the hearing. I know about the variance. I know about all of it. I've known for a while." He looked at her across the counter, the way Earl had, the way Millhaven had always looked at her, measuring the distance between who she seemed and who she was, and not quite being able to close it. "You have something," he said. "Yes." She paused. "The covenant on the deed." He was quiet a moment. "Dad's covenant." "You knew?" "Dad mentioned it once, years ago, after a hard season. One of those winters when the county started feeling different, when you'd see survey trucks on roads that didn't need surveying. Said he'd signed something with the federal government back in the 80s, something about protecting the land from being taken out of farming. Said there'd been pressure then too. A company out of Harrisburg wanted the whole northern corridor. He wasn't the kind of man to wait and see. I didn't know if it still held. It holds. Jonas wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. Outside, through the diner's front window, Garrett Voss's black SUV was still in the parking lot. Had been since before 8. "What are you going to do?" Jonas said. She wiped the counter, the same section she had already wiped twice. "What I came back to do," she said. That afternoon, she made 3 calls from the telephone at the branch library, 2 blocks from the diner. The first was to a colleague at the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission, someone she had worked with in Philadelphia, who had since moved into a senior preservation role. She picked up on the second ring and said Miriam's name, the way people say the name of someone they didn't expect to hear from. "It's been a long time." "It has. I need something from the Federal Registry, documented and on record by close of business today." A pause. "How many parcels?" 5. "You're sure about the covenant language?" "I have the original deed, page 34. The library here has a fax. I can be at it in 20 minutes. Make it 15, and Miriam, it's good to hear your voice." She didn't answer that. The second call went to the land rights organization in Harrisburg. 4 minutes. She gave them the case number she had already opened months prior, in anticipation. The third was to the county clerk's office, requesting the zoning variance hearing be flagged for federal review conflict. A procedural hold that could not be denied once a federal covenant was on record. By the time she walked back to the diner, it was 2 in the afternoon. Voss's SUV was gone. He came back the next morning, alone, no lawyers. He sat at the counter and waited. She put coffee in front of him, said nothing. "I've been on the phone with my title company for 6 hours, he said. "And with my land acquisition team, and with a federal attorney in D.C. who specializes in preservation law." She waited. "The covenant is ironclad. My attorney says 3 to 5 years and a federal act of negotiation to move around it. And even then it's not certain." She nodded once. "There are 4 other parcels, identical classifications." "Yes," she said, "which means the entire corridor I've been assembling for 18 months is—" He stopped. "Who are you?" She refilled his coffee. "A woman," he said slowly, "who went to Penn, worked in federal preservation law for several years. That's what my attorney thinks, based on the specificity of what you filed yesterday, who came back here and works a counter." She said nothing. Why? And she noticed for the first time that the question was genuine, not tactical. He wanted to actually know. "My father needed me," she said. "And then? And then I stayed because it was the right life, even though, she said. He was quiet for a long time. His coffee sat untouched. "I didn't know who you were," he said. "No, you saw the cap and the cash register, and you concluded the rest." She said it without heat. Clinically, the way she had always said things she meant. "You've been doing that with this whole county for 18 months, assuming that because something looks simple, it must be uncomplicated. That because people choose a plain life, they don't understand the world." He didn't argue. "The Byler farm has been on that land for 93 years. My father worked it every day of his adult life. The covenant that protects it was placed there by a federal government that recognized that some things, some specific documented things, are worth keeping. She folded the countercloth over the edge of the sink. You can build your corridor somewhere else. There's a lot of Pennsylvania. He sat with that. Outside, a buggy went by on the county road, the clip of hooves on asphalt, easy and rhythmic. You could have come to me earlier, he said, before any of this. You weren't ready to hear it earlier, she said. He almost said something, thought better of it. How did you know where to look? On page 34. She picked up the coffee pot. It's the kind of thing, she said, that my father told me to remember. The variance hearing was formally suspended 11 days later. The Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission issued official notice. 5 parcels in the Millhaven corridor under active federal preservation classification. Any zoning action requiring federal review. Timeline, 24 to 36 months, minimum. Voss's land acquisition team had already begun looking at other corridors. The county planning office sent the Baylor family a letter acknowledging the covenant and confirming that no further variance applications would be processed without federal clearance. Jonas read it twice at the kitchen table, then folded it and put it in the same drawer where he kept the deed. Dad would have been glad, he said. Miriam said, I know. They sat with that for a while. Then Jonas asked if she wanted to walk the fence line before dark, a section on the north pasture that needed looking at. She did. Word traveled, the way word travels in a place where the newspaper is still read on actual paper. Earl told the feed store. The feed store told the electricians. One electrician had a cousin in the county planning office, which was how it reached the young woman who had been eating alone at the diner that morning. She filed a separate memo flagging 2 additional corridor properties that might benefit from heritage classification review. Miriam didn't know about this for several weeks. When she found out, she didn't say anything. She dropped a jar of apple butter at the young woman's desk with a note that said, "Thank you," in her small, slanted cursive. 2 words that said everything she intended to say and nothing more. The taller lawyer, Rutherford, called once, from a personal number, 3 weeks after the hearing suspension. I reviewed your filing, the one with the commission. A pause. It was airtight. She was at the branch library telephone, raining outside. Yes, she said. 19 years I've been doing this work. Seen some sharp filings. Another pause. Shorter. That was sharp. Thank you, she said. If you ever wanted to. No, she said gently. But thank you. She hung up. She returned 2 books. Drove home in the rain, the buggy's wooden wheels on the wet road, the sound of it as familiar as breathing. 3 weeks after the hearing suspension, Miriam drove to Philadelphia, not for work, not for anything that needed explaining. She parked 2 blocks from Penn's campus and walked through the part she had known. The building where she had studied. The courtyard where she had eaten lunch in winter because she liked the cold and the quiet. She stood in front of the building for a while. A group of students came out laughing, talking about something she didn't catch. Young, sure of the shape of the future. She had been like that. Here in this courtyard, she had been absolutely sure. She was not sure now. That was the honest answer. She had made the right choice. She believed that the way she believed the fence line was true and the soil was good. But belief and certainty are not the same thing. She had given up something real. The version of herself that might have existed in that building, in that particular form of being known. She had given it up for her father's hand in hers. She would make the same choice again. But the other life sat inside her like a folded note, quiet and carried, never opened, never thrown away. She stood in the courtyard, until the cold drove her back to the car. She drove home. One evening in November, first frost, the fields given over to their winter silence. Jonas set something on the kitchen table between them. A photograph. Old. Faded at the edges. Their father, young, shockingly young, she had forgotten he had ever been young, standing in front of the farmhouse with a man in a suit from the federal government. Between them, a document. Both of them signing it. 1987. The covenant. Her father had known exactly what he was signing. Had known, 37 years ago, that the land would need protecting one day. He had signed it because in the mid-1980s, a company out of Harrisburg had begun eyeing the Northern Corridor. The same logic, a different decade. He had simply done the work and said nothing about it, the way he had always done work. Quietly, completely, without asking to be watched. She looked at the photograph for a long time. He knew, she said. He always knew, Jonas said. She put the photograph behind the counter the next morning, under the register, where she kept the few things that mattered most. 6 months after that, Millhaven had already begun to refer to it simply as the diner, as in before the diner and after the diner. The County Historical Society applied for a formal agricultural heritage district designation covering the Northern Corridor. It was approved 14 months later. It protected 27 properties. Miriam's name appeared nowhere in the application. A reporter from a Lancaster paper called the Sunrise Diner in October. She told him she didn't have time to talk. He asked about the Heritage District, asked if she had been involved. "I serve coffee," she said. "Ms. Byler. Apple butter too, if that's of interest." The reporter wrote the story without her. She was mentioned in one line as a local Amish resident who had flagged the preservation issue. The line was accurate. It was also in every meaningful way incomplete. That was exactly right. Outside, the first buggy of the morning passed on the county road. Hooves on blacktop, steady and unhurried. The sound of it traveled through the diner's thin walls and disappeared into the cold November air. Miriam Byler turned the coffee on. In 2 hours, the diner would fill. Earl would come. The electricians would argue about the Eagles. The young woman from the planning office had started coming on Thursdays. In the spring, Jonas was going to plant the north field in winter wheat. The farm was still there. It was going to stay there. That was enough. It had always been enough. Even when she was in Philadelphia, sharp and certain and known, that farm, those fields, her father's handwriting on the deed, it had been the thing that was most real. She had spent 7 years in the world learning how to protect it. She had not known that was what she was doing at the time. Maybe that was the thing about knowledge. It does not always know its own purpose when you are gathering it. It waits, sits in you, folded, quiet, available, until the morning a man walks into a diner with a folder and a certainty that the woman behind the counter is not worth listening to. And then it unfolds. 3 sentences on a torn page, and the corridor falls. Some people carry the whole weight of a world they chose to leave behind, so that the world they chose instead can stand.